Most men try to prove their value. High-value men don't. They show it. Without begging, without explaining, without trying too hard. And women notice. If you want her to respect you, if you want her to feel your presence, if you want her to see you as the prize, these 7 behaviors will quietly teach her your worth. Comment, I reclaim my value, if you're ready to watch till the end. Number 1, you do not chase. You stare at your phone and watch the screen like it controls your oxygen. You check when she was last online. You calculate how long to wait before replying so you do not look too eager, yet you are already eager. You tell yourself you are just being attentive, but the truth is, you are afraid to lose her, and that fear leaks through every message, every fast reply, every just checking in text that pretends to be casual while begging for reassurance. And she reads that fear clearly because attention is currency, and you are spending it recklessly. You are teaching her that your time bends around hers, that your schedule is flexible for her convenience, that your standards are adjustable if she withdraws slightly. And once that lesson is learned, it is almost impossible to reverse, because people rarely increase their respect for someone who overextends. So you stop chasing not as a tactic, but as a decision rooted in self-command. You decide that if someone wants access to you, they must step toward you equally. You respond once and then return to your life. You let unanswered messages sit without creating stories in your head. You train yourself to sit with uncertainty instead of reacting to it. You go to the gym when you want to text again. You build your business when you want to double message. You call a friend when you want to stalk her social media. You convert craving into productivity. You understand that chasing is not romantic. It is negotiation from a weaker position. You notice how often you compromise just to keep her engaged, how you agree with opinions you do not respect, how you lower your humor to avoid offending, how you apologize for things that are not wrong, and you see that every small concession chips away at your backbone, so you rebuild it through discipline. You decide that if she cancels last minute, you respond calmly, and you do not rearrange your week for someone who cannot honor their word. You observe patterns instead of excuses. If she consistently pulls away after intimacy, you do not pursue harder. You reduce access and let her actions speak, because you accept that attraction cannot be negotiated. You understand that when someone senses you have options and direction, they step carefully around you, and when they sense you are afraid to lose them, they test limits. You stop rewarding inconsistency with more effort. You stop romanticizing emotional distance. You stop telling yourself that patience will turn indifference into devotion. You accept reality as it is, not as you hope it becomes. You embody restraint. You speak less. You initiate less. You invest proportionally. And if energy drops, you do not compensate. You match it or you exit. You write down your weekly priorities and you refuse to abandon them for last-minute validation. You cultivate hobbies and ambitions that make your days full, so that waiting for replies becomes irrelevant. You understand that Stoic strength is not coldness, but control. You allow outcomes to unfold without chasing them. You detach from immediate gratification. You recognize that if someone truly values you, they do not require pursuit to stay, and if they require constant pursuit, they are enjoying power, not partnership. You accept that walking away from low effort is more attractive than begging for minimal attention. You hold your posture internally. You breathe before reacting. You let people come toward you freely, and by doing so, you teach a silent lesson that your presence is earned, not chased, and in that restraint, you reclaim dignity that you once traded for temporary comfort. You stop orbiting someone's world and start building your own, and the shift is visible. Your messages become concise. Your schedule becomes structured. Your tone becomes steady. Your attention becomes selective, and suddenly you notice that the same people who once delayed replies Now respond faster because you are no longer signaling need. You are signaling standards, and that change begins with one decision made today. You do not chase. And in that restraint, you reclaim dignity that you once traded for temporary comfort. And if you are ready to build that level of discipline into every area of your relationships, the Stoic Relationship Blueprint ebook for men was created for exactly this moment, filled with timeless Stoic principles that rewire how you think, act, and respond, so you stop chasing and start commanding respect naturally. It breaks down step by step how to master detachment, emotional control, boundaries, and purpose in a way you can apply immediately, not someday, not when you feel ready, but now. It's now available in audiobook version, so you can listen while walking, training, driving, or clearing your head, turning ordinary time into transformation. The link is in the comments, and once it's yours, it stays yours, meaning this knowledge becomes a permanent tool you can return to whenever life tests you again. The only real question is how much longer you plan to repeat the same patterns before deciding to own the blueprint that changes them for good. Number 2, you control your emotions. She tests you with subtle comments. She compares you to someone else. She withdraws affection to observe your reaction. And your instinct is to defend, to explain, to prove. Yet every emotional spike hands over leverage because reactivity communicates instability. And instability invites further testing, so you build command over your internal state. You understand that your first emotion is automatic, but your response is chosen. You pause before speaking. You slow your breathing when irritation rises. You refuse to send messages written in frustration. You train daily through voluntary discomfort, so small relational friction does not shake you. You lift weights when you do not want to. You wake up early when comfort calls. You finish tasks you would rather avoid, because discipline in private creates steadiness in public. And when she says something meant to provoke, you answer with clarity instead of intensity. You look at her calmly and say what you mean in simple words without raising your tone. You do not escalate sarcasm with sarcasm. You do not compete for dominance through volume. You choose composure, and composure unsettles manipulation because it removes the reaction that fuels it. You recognize how often you previously overreacted out of insecurity, how jealousy drove you to interrogate instead of observe, how fear of abandonment pushed you to demand reassurance, and you see that those behaviors taught others they could destabilize you easily, so you correct course. You adopt the principle that you cannot control someone's actions, but you can control your interpretation and response. You detach from needing to win every argument. You focus on maintaining self-respect rather than scoring points. You speak directly when something crosses a line, and then you stop talking. You refuse to chase apologies. You watch patterns instead of isolated incidents. You remain centered when she withholds attention because your identity is not dependent on her mood. You invest energy into building competence in areas that strengthen your confidence. So emotional spikes decrease naturally. You stop reacting to social media games. You do not decode every post as a hidden message. You refuse to allow indirect behavior to dictate your state. You keep your routine intact regardless of relational turbulence. You journal at night to process thoughts privately instead of unloading them impulsively. You seek solutions instead of sympathy. You measure growth by how calmly you handle provocation compared to last month. You understand that steadiness commands respect more than intensity ever will. You see that emotional control is not suppression but mastery. You allow yourself to experience disappointment without dramatizing it. You accept that not every connection is meant to last, and that desperation to preserve it damages your integrity. You cultivate patience. You delay reactions. You examine your assumptions before accusing. You give measured responses that reflect strength. And when someone realizes they cannot manipulate your mood, they either step up or step away. Both outcomes benefit you because your peace remains intact, and in mastering your responses, you transform from reactive to intentional, from anxious to grounded, from uncertain to composed, and that composure becomes the quiet signal that your worth is not negotiable. Number 3, you set boundaries. You tolerate small disrespect because you are afraid that calling it out will push her away. You laugh when she makes a cutting joke about you in front of others. You ignore the subtle comparison to someone she claims is just a friend. You accept last-minute cancellations with a smile while rearranging your priorities, and every time you swallow discomfort to avoid tension, you teach her that access to you comes without responsibility. You teach her that your standards are negotiable, that your time is elastic, that your patience has no edge, and then you wonder why the behavior escalates, why the sarcasm becomes sharper, why the effort becomes inconsistent, why the appreciation fades. And the truth is harsh but liberating because people expand into the space you allow. And if you allow carelessness, they will operate carelessly. So you draw lines calmly and clearly, not with anger, not with speeches, but with short, direct statements that communicate self-respect. You say, "I don't accept that." And you hold eye contact. You say, "If we plan something, I expect it to be honored." And you mean it. You say, "That comment crosses a line," and you do not laugh afterward to soften it, because softening your boundary erases it. You understand that boundaries without consequences are decoration, so when patterns repeat, you reduce access without dramatic announcements. You become less available, less invested, less responsive. You stop rewarding inconsistency with attention, and when she notices the shift and asks what changed, you explain once with clarity, and then you observe her response rather than argue, because someone who values you adjusts, while someone who benefits from your tolerance resists, and that resistance reveals everything you need to know. You stop negotiating basic respect. You stop trying to educate someone into treating you properly. You stop confusing potential with reality. You understand that self-command means accepting that not everyone qualifies for your time. You write down 3 standards that are non-negotiable, and you hold them regardless of attraction, regardless of loneliness, regardless of how long you have known her. You practice saying no in small areas of life, so that saying no in relationships becomes natural. You decline invitations that disrupt your priorities. You correct interruptions mid-sentence without apology. You remove yourself from conversations that drift into disrespect. You strengthen your spine through daily discipline so that boundaries are not forced but embodied. And when she realizes that pushing you results in distance rather than pleading, she recalibrates or exits. Both outcomes restore your position, because you are no longer operating from fear of loss, but from commitment to dignity. And that shift transforms your entire presence. Your tone becomes firmer, your decisions cleaner, your energy more grounded, and people sense that access to you is conditional upon mutual respect, not emotional leverage. And in holding boundaries, you stop asking to be valued and start requiring it through action. Number 4, you have your own life. You center your schedule around her availability. You cancel workouts to meet at the last minute. You delay projects because she might call. You check your phone during conversations with others. You shrink your world to maintain proximity, and then you sense attraction fading without understanding why, because when you abandon your direction to orbit someone else, you communicate that your path lacks weight, and attraction thrives on momentum, on structure, on someone who moves with purpose regardless of who joins the journey. So you rebuild your foundation from the ground up. You define long-term objectives that excite you and break them into weekly targets. You schedule your days with intention before any relationship enters the picture. You commit to physical training 3 to 5 times a week, not to impress but to strengthen discipline. You allocate focused hours for work and learning, so progress becomes measurable. You cultivate friendships that challenge and support you. You invest in hobbies that sharpen skill and creativity, and when someone wants your time, you fit them into a life already in motion rather than pausing everything to accommodate. You understand that scarcity of time increases perceived value, but more importantly, it increases self-respect. Because you are no longer waiting for validation to justify your day, you wake up with direction, you go to sleep with accomplishment, you build competence in areas that make you proud, independent of anyone's opinion. You stop making her the emotional center of your universe. You stop asking for permission to pursue your ambitions. You stop feeling guilty for choosing your growth over immediate comfort. And when she notices that your calendar is structured and your energy is directed, she experiences you as grounded rather than dependent. You do not brag about being busy, you simply are. You respond to messages when convenient rather than instantly. You protect deep work hours. You decline invitations that conflict with priorities without lengthy explanations. You cultivate internal validation through progress tracked privately. You reflect weekly on improvements and setbacks without self-pity. You accept that some will interpret your focus as distance, and you allow that interpretation to stand, because your mission is not to appease, but to build. And as your life expands beyond a single connection, your anxiety decreases naturally, because your identity is no longer tied to one person's attention. You realize that a relationship should complement your direction, not replace it. You operate from choice, not need, and that independence shifts dynamics instantly, because when someone senses they are joining a strong trajectory rather than rescuing a drifting one, they engage differently, they invest differently, they respect boundaries more readily. And even if they choose to leave, your structure remains intact. Your progress continues, your confidence compounds, and you stand stronger than before, proving through consistent action that your worth is anchored in purpose, not proximity. Number 5. You speak less. Over-explaining becomes a habit formed from years of trying to be understood, trying to avoid conflict, trying to make sure no one misinterprets intentions. Yet the more words used to defend a position, the weaker that position appears, because excessive explanation signals doubt rather than certainty. And in modern relationships where attention spans are short and options appear endless, brevity carries weight while rambling invites dismissal. Long justifications after simple decisions communicate a need for approval, and that need lowers perceived value instantly. So restraint in speech becomes a discipline that reshapes presence entirely. Fewer words, slower delivery, steady tone, direct statements without emotional decoration, answers that end where they should end instead of spiraling into essays. Because power in communication lies not in volume, but in clarity. And clarity requires confidence in one's stance, which is built through internal work rather than verbal gymnastics. Consider how often conversations become interviews where one person overshares personal history, trauma, ambition, future plans in an attempt to impress, only to sense attraction drop subtly because mystery collapses under constant exposure. Information given too freely loses impact, so discretion becomes strategy rooted in self-respect, speaking only what adds value, withholding what is unnecessary, allowing silence to create space for the other person to invest, because investment grows where there is room, and when every gap is filled with nervous chatter, the opportunity for curiosity disappears. Disciplined speech also protects against manipulation, as baited comments designed to provoke emotional paragraphs receive concise responses. Instead, statements like, "That's not accurate," or "I disagree," delivered calmly and then allowed to stand without further elaboration, force the other party to either clarify or retreat, while endless rebuttals transform into defensive spirals. Practical implementation begins with pausing before responding to any emotionally charged statement, counting slowly, asking internally whether this reply serves dignity or ego, cutting responses in half before sending, deleting unnecessary sentences, avoiding overuse of emojis or exaggerated punctuation that soften authority, practicing eye contact during in-person dialogue without rushing to fill quiet moments, allowing others to speak more than half the time, asking pointed questions instead of delivering speeches, redirecting conversations that drift into gossip or negativity with short boundaries, refusing to argue through text where tone becomes distorted and misunderstandings multiply, instead suggesting direct conversation or disengaging entirely, reading more than speaking in group settings to observe dynamics and respond strategically rather than impulsively, journaling thoughts privately so conversations remain focused instead of therapeutic monologues, because emotional processing belongs in reflection, not in seeking validation from someone still evaluating commitment, recognizing that controlled speech demonstrates emotional regulation, which signals maturity and stability attracts respect, especially in a climate where reactive communication dominates. Transformation through disciplined speech extends beyond dating into career, friendships, family interactions, as reputation forms around someone whose words carry precision and intention, who does not gossip, who does not overshare, who does not exaggerate, who does not apologize for existing, who speaks truth plainly and then stands by it. This approach may appear distant to those accustomed to chaotic exchanges, yet over time it commands a different level of regard, because people trust those who do not scatter their thoughts carelessly. They sense substance behind quiet composure, and as this practice strengthens, internal noise reduces as well. Fewer imaginary arguments rehearsed, fewer explanations prepared for events that never occur, because silence externally reflects calm internally, and that calm becomes a foundation for every other behavior in this framework, ultimately teaching through action that attention from such a composed individual is earned, not extracted through drama, and that realization shifts dynamics in subtle but powerful ways. Number 6. You do not seek validation. Approval seeking often disguises itself as openness or vulnerability, yet beneath it lies dependence on external affirmation to stabilize identity, and in modern dating culture, where praise and attention are distributed inconsistently, building self-worth on fluctuating reactions creates constant instability, waiting for compliments to confirm attractiveness, waiting for reassurance to confirm security, waiting for consistent texting to confirm importance. This cycle hands emotional control outward, making mood contingent on another person's behavior. And when that behavior shifts, anxiety rises immediately. So the solution begins with internal audit, examining how often questions like, "Are we okay?" or "Do you still care?" arise not from genuine communication needs, but from insecurity seeking comfort. Recognizing that each request for reassurance signals uncertainty in personal value, and uncertainty reduces attraction, because stability draws people while insecurity burdens them. Developing internal validation requires measurable standards, independent of romantic attention, tracking commitments kept, workouts completed, financial goals advanced, skills improved, promises honored, because self-respect grows from evidence of discipline, not from compliments. Creating daily routines that reinforce competence builds quiet confidence that does not require public acknowledgement. Reducing social media consumption prevents subconscious comparison with curated illusions. Limiting exposure to validation. Driven environments preserves focus on tangible progress. When interacting romantically, refraining from fishing for praise or probing for status updates about the relationship, instead observing consistency of actions over words. If interest decreases, resisting the urge to chase reassurance and instead redirecting energy toward personal objectives, understanding that someone genuinely invested will demonstrate it without interrogation, and someone withholding effort reveals priorities clearly through behavior. Detachment becomes strength here, not coldness but refusal to beg for confirmation of worth. Practicing self-approval in solitude, standing in front of a mirror each morning and assessing posture, eye contact, tone, reminding oneself of standards upheld and areas requiring improvement, not harshly but honestly, because truth builds resilience. Adopting mindset that loss of someone uninterested is not tragedy but filtration. Accepting that validation addiction keeps many trapped in situations beneath their standards. Releasing that addiction requires tolerance for temporary uncertainty, allowing silence without scrambling to fill it with requests for affirmation. Spending evenings productively instead of anxiously refreshing message threads, cultivating friendships and mentorships based on growth rather than ego-stroking, seeking constructive criticism from trusted sources instead of empty praise from unreliable ones, recognizing patterns where excessive giving aims to earn appreciation and consciously scaling back to balanced reciprocity, valuing peace over praise, direction over applause. Because applause fades while character compounds, controversial truth emerges that individuals who rely heavily on constant reassurance often become less respected over time, not because reassurance is wrong, but because overdependence signals fragility, and fragility invites control. Breaking that cycle demands courage to stand alone in self-belief, even when external validation temporarily disappears, and through consistent practice, internal stability strengthens to the point where praise becomes pleasant but unnecessary, criticism becomes information rather than identity threat, and romantic dynamics shift as others sense independence rooted deeply within. Realizing that attention from someone who does not need it carries more weight, and that self-assured presence reshapes interactions entirely, ultimately proving that value affirmed internally radiates outward without verbal announcement. Number 7. You can walk away. Attachment without standards creates quiet desperation, and desperation is sensed instantly, even when hidden behind confident words, because remaining in situations that repeatedly violate self-respect communicates louder than any speech about boundaries ever could. Staying after consistent mixed signals, staying after repeated cancellations, staying after subtle disrespect disguised as humor, staying after promises are broken and rationalized. All of it teaches one brutal lesson: that access to you has no cost, and when access has no cost, it carries no value. So the final and most powerful behavior becomes the willingness to walk away without spectacle, without dramatic exits, without long emotional explanations seeking closure, because true detachment operates from decision, not from performance. And this is where many struggle most, since walking away forces confrontation with loneliness, ego bruising, and the discomfort of starting again. Yet remaining where standards are unmet erodes identity slowly until self-trust weakens. So discipline demands choosing long-term dignity over short-term comfort, recognizing patterns early instead of hoping they disappear, observing inconsistency objectively rather than romantically interpreting it, asking internally whether behavior aligns with declared intentions, and when misalignment persists, acting accordingly, not with anger but with resolve, sending one clear message if necessary that communicates expectation and boundary, then stepping back fully if change does not occur, refusing to maintain half-access arrangements where attention is given only when convenient, refusing to participate in cycles of hot and cold engagement that destabilize focus, because each cycle drains energy better invested elsewhere, building the habit of exiting small, disrespectful situations daily so that larger exits become less intimidating. Leaving conversations that turn condescending, declining invitations that compromise priorities, distancing from people who repeatedly undermine growth, strengthening independence financially, socially, physically, so that departure from any single relationship does not collapse stability, understanding that options grow when competence grows, and competence grows through consistent self-investment, reframing rejection as redirection rather than proof of inadequacy, accepting that not every connection is meant to last, and that clinging to expired dynamics blocks healthier opportunities, cultivating internal dialogue that reinforces worth independent of external approval, repeating commitments to standards until they become identity, practicing emotional regulation during separation instead of reacting with impulsive texts or public displays aimed at provoking response, channeling that intensity into productive routines, increasing gym frequency, deepening work focus, expanding social circle deliberately rather than isolating, documenting lessons learned from each ended situation to prevent repetition of patterns, identifying where tolerance exceeded wisdom, adjusting criteria accordingly, realizing that walking away calmly unsettles those accustomed to controlling through inconsistency, because absence removes leverage entirely, and whether they attempt to return or not becomes secondary to the fact that self-respect remained intact. Controversial truth surfaces that many remain in unsatisfying dynamics, not because alternatives are unavailable, but because fear of solitude overrides commitment to growth. Yet solitude used intentionally becomes refinement, strengthening mindset, clarifying standards, sharpening discipline, studying personal weaknesses honestly without self-pity, committing to improved communication, improved physical presence, improved financial stability, improved emotional regulation, so that future connections begin from strength, not scarcity. Recognizing that walking away once may hurt, but staying repeatedly harms deeper, and harm accumulated over time reshapes identity in damaging ways. Therefore, courage becomes daily practice rather than dramatic act. Stepping away at the first clear pattern of disrespect, rather than waiting for undeniable betrayal. Accepting that explanations are often unnecessary because actions reveal truth sufficiently. Refusing to beg for alignment when misalignment is evident. Embracing the Stoic approach of focusing solely on controllable actions while releasing attachment to outcomes, standing firm in decision even when nostalgia tempts reconsideration, reminding oneself that consistency and respect are baseline requirements, not luxuries, and through repeated reinforcement of this principle, transformation occurs gradually but permanently. Posture changes, tone stabilizes, choices sharpen, relationships improve in quality even if quantity decreases, and life overall becomes structured around dignity rather than fear, ultimately proving that the power to walk away is the foundation upon which all other behaviors rest, because without that power boundaries collapse, emotional control weakens, purpose bends, speech loses weight, validation seeking resurfaces, chasing resumes, but with it firmly established every other trait strengthens automatically, creating a presence that commands respect, not through force, but through unwavering alignment with personal standards. Most people will ignore this message, go back to chasing validation, and repeat the same painful cycles. But if something inside you knows you are done living beneath your potential, then the Stoic Relationship Blueprint ebook for men is the line in the sand, filled with timeless Stoic principles that will transform your life immediately and force you to operate from discipline instead of desperation. Society benefits from you distracted, emotional, and confused in relationships because a grounded, self-controlled man is harder to manipulate and impossible to guilt into shrinking himself. The book is now available in audiobook version, so you can absorb this life-changing knowledge while walking, training, driving, building your body and your mind at the same time. And once you own it, this wisdom is yours for life, always accessible whenever you need to recalibrate. If you are ready to stop chasing and start commanding respect, comment "unshakable" right now so you make that commitment publicly. Like the video and subscribe to help more men find these truths and save themselves years of regret.